folks are joining us from. We really appreciate your joining us today for this really exciting webinar that's going to be focused on information and communication technology for monitoring and evaluation programming for refugee populations. My name is Anthony Bloom, and I'm USAID in the Office of Education. I support education technology. I'm also proud to be a member supporting the two networks that are helping organize today's webinar. And these include USAID's Education and Crisis and Conflict Network, or ECCN, and I imagine a number of colleagues on the phone may be part of that network. And then a technology task team as part of the International Network of Education and Emergencies that's co-hosting today's session, and I'm affiliated with both groups. What we're really excited by is the exploration that this and future webinars will have, looking at how technology can add value to education in crisis and conflict settings. And obviously this topic is relevant because of the growing scale of which we're all aware of the global refugee crisis, and obviously the challenges that we have in regards to effectively, sustainably, scalably supporting programming to support learners in these settings, and really looking specifically at what the role of technology broadly defined can be in helping us serve these education needs. So today we'll be focusing on understanding how we could leverage technology to appropriately monitor and evaluate education programs for refugees. And I think there's both the use of technology to monitor and evaluate programs, but also importantly that we simply have more investments in regards to monitoring and evaluation more broadly in the field of technology and education, that we can really identify those good practices that can be replicated and scaled. This webinar is part of a series that these two networks are organizing around technology in emergency settings, and we're really excited that we have some other ones that are planned and in the works, including one on game-based learning that will be featured in late October, and then one on ICT and higher education that will be hosted in November. There's a variety of opportunities for you to engage in these webinars. The ECCN itself regularly hosts webinars in various topics, and to become a member of that, to be informed about those events, it's ECCNnetwork.net, but we'll send that around, we'll circulate that around should you want to join. I should also say that some of you may be joining us next week for an annual event that my office helps organize with partners called the Mobiles for Education Alliance Symposium. That will be taking place in Washington, D.C. on October 5th and 6th. For those of you who are on the phone that might be available or interested in joining us, please shoot me an email. We can make my email available as well. We have a few invitation-only slots still available. And crisis and conflict will be one of the focal areas, as it's been for the last 6 annual symposium as well. So without further ado, I really appreciate the opportunity and look forward to the discussion from our colleagues who will be talking about some really interesting projects working in this space. I do want to turn it over at this point to Lisa Hartenberger, who works with our ECCN network, to take it away and provide the introductions for the next steps for this webinar. Thank you for the invitation and look forward to the discussion. Lisa?
Thanks very much, Tony. As Tony said, my name is Lisa Hartenberger-Toby. I provide support to ECCN and uses of ICT, and I also manage Education Development Center's monitoring and evaluation team. So I'm particularly interested in the topic today as well. I'll be introducing our two presenters to you, and I'll be managing our question and answer session at the end. But before we get started, just a few housekeeping tips. For those of you who may not participate in that many webinars, please do mute your microphone, which helps minimize background noise. If you are having bandwidth issues, you can turn off the video. And if you need to adjust your audio settings, just go under the audio menu. If you are having any connection issues while you're connecting, please just type it into the chat area or email the address up there, webinars@ineesite.org, and we have technical support that can assist you. We won't be taking questions until the very end, until both presentations are already finished, but you can post questions in the chat area at any time during the presentations. We'll be collecting all of those questions, and then we'll be addressing them at the end of the presentations. If you also want to just raise your hand, use the little hand button at the end, we can also take questions that way. This session is being recorded, so if you want to look back, you're welcome to look at the recording, and the presentations will be available on the INEE website as well as the ECCN websites. So you can also forward any information to colleagues who might be interested. So I'll get started with presenting our two presenters today. We're going to be starting with Alison Krupar. Allie's a researcher at Pennsylvania State University. She currently serves as the Senior Associate managing the Right to Education Index, which is an international index monitoring the satisfaction of the right to education. She also teaches monitoring and evaluation at Penn State and American University, as well as introductory adult education courses online. Her work focuses on education for those affected by violent conflict and migration and displacement, and she specifically engages in monitoring and evaluation of educational programming and planning. She holds a PhD in lifelong learning and adult education and comparative and international education from Pennsylvania State. So welcome to Ali. Our second presenter is Alban Kurketin. She is Education Manager of the Instant School Network Schools program at the Vodafone Foundation, where she has worked on the Connecting for Good strategy, which supports education in refugee camps using technology in collaboration with UNHCR. She has worked as a strategy and innovation consultant for the telecom and digital industry, as well as working with the NGO Telecom Sans Frontières as a volunteer responder. She's responded to disasters in the Philippines and Indonesia, and regularly deploys to refugee camps, mostly in Africa. So Alban holds a Master's of Science in ICT from the Asian Institute of Technology and graduated as a telecom engineer from Telecom Sud Paris. So welcome to both of you, and I'll pass it straight over to Ali.
Thank you. Can everyone hear me? Is this? Yeah. So as the introduction, my name is Ali Krupar, and I have been working on a variety of projects. The one I'm presenting today is based off of work with REST International, partially supported by the Faster Forward Fund. And this is an ICT for M&E project where we were using local resources in order to improve youth participation in monitoring and evaluation of youth-led projects through a non-formal education project. So this project compared youth who used auto photography to identify impacts and outcomes from projects that they initiated in their communities, with youth who did more traditional monitoring and evaluation, documenting through observational checklists and informational interviews. So we're looking at, instead of the outcome of the evaluation, the outcome of comparing the two methods. One using photography as an ICT for M&E solution, and one that's using without that ICT component. And so hopefully this will be useful for practitioners who are working in hard-to-reach locations where conducting evaluation on the ground is a little bit difficult. I'm being told I'm a little bit too quiet. That's a new thing for me. So I'm going to try to speak a little bit louder. So the other thing to keep in mind about this project is we're working in the Dadaab refugee camps. So this is where there's some insecurity issues in accessing projects that are happening in camps, in monitoring what's going on in those locations. And we really are trying to engage the youth themselves who are working in the project to lead on the monitoring and evaluation. So it was part educational in their role as monitoring and evaluators, and partly as the organizational side, trying to find out what was happening in the communities based off of these projects. So, okay, I'm going to do this. Very quickly, I'm going to talk a little bit about the problem, which I've already alluded to, and then what the solution we came up with using local resources, knowledge, and a participatory action research project. and then talk a little bit about the results of comparing these two methods of using photography and not using photography. So the problem is that we had, first of all, the project itself is youth-led social change projects in RET International's Youth Capacity Building for Social Change program. And so these varied across topics that youth identified themselves after participating in RET-sponsored and supported training. So the main emphasis of the project is that youth would lead these social change projects in their communities and then be able to identify what works, what doesn't work. And so that was part of this participatory action research project. The other problem, which I've already alluded to, is the insecurity in camps restricted M&E officers at RET to be able to go in and find out what was really happening after these projects took place, or during the projects in some cases. And so the physical monitoring was difficult, and working with youth in order to engage in monitoring was the solution that we came up with. And then the capacity itself, one part of the project itself is to build youth capacity in order to undertake these projects. And so monitoring and evaluation is an important component of that. So our solution was to use what I'm calling auto photography, but really what it is that we would provide cameras to the youth who are participating in these projects and leading these projects that they designed, and ask them to document what they perceived as the outcomes or potential impacts of the projects in which they led. That process came about by using smartphones, digital photography. The youth we were working with, many of whom had already used smartphones and cameras in order to take their own pictures, and we're very eager to learn more about how to use this. So there was a training on how to use the cameras and how to do the monitoring and evaluation for people who were participating with or without the cameras. And so the other component is that we wanted the youth to be engaging in monitoring and evaluation rather than the organizational staff entirely doing the sort of oversight capacity. And that was part of a participatory action research project. The youth were engaged not just as beneficiaries, but as evaluators themselves. And then, of course, we had this comparative approach of looking at these two different types. And that came about because we wanted to see if the photography where the youth were actually engaging in the monitoring and evaluation by documenting it using basic ICT resources would be more useful, would reveal different data than using more traditional approaches. And so auto photography, just as a brief background, comes out of photo voice projects, a lot of different monitoring and evaluation research that uses photography in order to influence policy, change programming. There's a long history of this. And again, we're looking at a less high-tech, but still using tech in monitoring and evaluation approach here. The other thing to keep in mind is this is a most significant change evaluation. When we talk about impacts, we're not talking about RCTs. We're thinking about what are youth identifying as the significant changes in their communities. So it's very qualitative in the data that we collected. The results, first, is to think about what the projects were. So the youth-led photographic evaluations were focusing on different issues that they identified in their community that they had done different activities on. So some of the activities would be sporting events or community meetings or community cleanups where everybody would get together, or youth working with adults in order to repair construction on particular facilities. These all were identified by the youth prior to any of the evaluation component. So they identified their projects, they conducted the projects, and then we met after the project to talk about how they would do evaluation and how they could use these tools for monitoring and evaluation in their communities. So in both groups who used auto photography and those who didn't, there were some biases, there were some similar results. There were things that came out about social cohesion activities. There was a lot that was similar in the results from both groups, but there was the real crux of the comparison between using the auto photography and not was thinking about the depth of the information that we received. So because it's a photographic project, I wanted to share some photos. We have, this was an example that was given by one of the youth who was talking about child labor as an issue, and they described how youth are in the markets and unable to attend school. This one was a particular photograph showing a child actually engaging in labor, carrying what I think was coal or fuel back and forth between community and the market. And so that's just one example of some of the data that was gained from looking at the photographic elements. When we compared the methods themselves, so with auto photography and without auto photography, you can see on this slide some of the themes that came up. The themes were very similar, right? The projects that the youth were engaging in were the same regardless of whether or not they were using auto photography, because they had already identified those projects. But with auto photography, the youth were more able to identify observable change, whereas without auto photography, in interviews and discussions of what had changed in the community using the most significant change interviewing approach, observable change wasn't something that came up. The other things that were different is that more projects were identified for future development with the youth who used auto photography compared to those who didn't. And that may be also related to something I've alluded to earlier, that the youth, the training involved for the youth who are using auto photography, they were trained in how to use the cameras more. It was slightly different. The rapport was slightly more with the youth who were using photography. And then there were also more identified challenges. So that's a strength, but also showing that the youth who were using auto photography may have been more engaged in the evaluation process because of their use of these tech tools. And so this is just another example of a photograph that the youth showed. This was actually showing impact in this particular example. They were talking about how the youth were able to develop revision groups where they would review and revise together before or after school. And so this is a photo documenting one of those groups meeting. And so some of the recommendations that came out of our comparison between using these two tools is obviously engaging youth in the evaluation process was particularly beneficial. The more rapport we were able to build with youth, whether it was through the photography or through more face-to-face time, the more likely the youth would be able to provide challenges, would feel free to talk about what future projects that they were planning. So really engaging youth in the evaluation process, in this participatory process, was valuable. Using local resources, I saw a question came up, that's why I hesitated, but I'll get to that later, and when we come back for Q&A. Using local resources was very important because it showed that youth were able to use the technology in their community for different purposes. So a lot of Dadaab does not have universal smartphone use by a long shot, but there are a lot of phones, and there are a lot of phones that have photographic capabilities. So using local resources like individual mobile phones is particularly useful. Using local knowledge of knowing how to take photographs through these tools is also useful. And then also the last part was really enjoying the project evaluation, making it an enjoyable process and less of a chore, that I think came out of the interviews with youth because they were so engaged in the process. and involved from the beginning of their project design to eventually telling us what worked and what didn't in their project so that we could continue the youth capacity building training as well as future projects. And again, here's just some more photographs of what the youth came up with. This was a youth association meeting that they documented to show that there had been more youth engagement as leaders in the community following activities that they had implemented. And then here's another youth engagement activity, and this is a sensitization campaign where youth are together as well as other people in the community to talk about issues that are pressing. The other component, which I haven't had much opportunity to talk about here in the project, but was very important in the project design, is encouraging youth-adult partnerships. So not separating youth out as one group siloed within the community, but how youth are engaging with adults. And this picture was given as an example of youth and adults working together to solve a problem. They're repairing some structures here together. And so I didn't talk a lot about how people were identified into which groups and some of the more technical methodological backgrounds. So if you have questions about that, feel free. But I wanted to keep this really short so we could get into the conversation. So thank you. My contact information is here if you want to talk individually, and then we can also, I look forward to your questions.
Great, thanks so much, Ali. We'll just pass right straight over to Alban, and then we'll take questions after Alban's presentation from everyone. Thanks.
Thank you, Lisa. Hello, everyone. Can I just check if the sound is working? It looks like it. Yes, perfect. So delighted to be with you today. So as Lisa mentioned, I'm working for the Vodafone Foundation and more specifically for the Instant Network Schools program. And before we start discussing the topic of today, which is the use of ICT towards monitoring and evaluation of educational programming, I just want to really briefly introduce the INS program for those who are not familiar with the program. So the Instant Network Schools program started in 2014 as a joint collaboration between UNHCR and Vodafone Foundation. And the concept of the program is really to provide students and teachers in refugee camps with access to technology, internet, digital educational tools to really enhance the quality of learning in the refugee context. So as such, the INS program is really building on the existing school infrastructure in the refugee camps. So we work with UNHCR and the educational partners to integrate and complement existing education programming. So within this project, technology is really not seen as an end goal. It's seen as an enabler. So the program is not about teaching about computer science or ICT. It's really about leveraging technology to improve the delivery of classes, to improve the way teachers are preparing for their lessons for any topics included into the local curriculum. And the INS, so the Instant Network Schools program, we call it INS, is really based on a holistic approach. And we have defined 9 key pillars that are essential for the program to be successful in the grant. And some of those pillars, as you can see in the slide, are very much focused on the technology, such as the provision of hardware, connectivity, power, etc. But this needs to be complemented by other elements, such as educational content, a strong teacher training program, making sure there is a human-centered design approach being implemented to make sure there is local ownership of the program and the teams on the ground are able to lead locally led initiatives. And as you can see in the slides, the monitoring and evaluation piece is very centric to and critical to the success of the INS program. So at the moment, just a clear, short overview. So we have 31 schools across 4 countries, which are Kenya, Tanzania, DRC, and South Sudan. And every month we reach out to about 40,000 students and 600 teachers across those schools. So now coming back to the topic of the day, and just to share with you a bit of history around our approach to M&E for the INS program. So initially when we started, we actually designed an M&E framework which was meant to capture the level of activities in the INS center, but also to measure impacts. And this M&E framework was heavily relying on manual data collection process and a lot of paper-based reporting mechanism. A few months after operation and testing of this M&E framework, really outlined some major challenges with this approach, and those challenges were mainly linked to the operational context and constraints in the field, and that Ali touched on, for example, in Dadaab refugee camps, and those contexts can be found also in other camps. So what we found is that actually data using this manual M&E framework came in very late, and there were huge delays between the time the data is effectively collected in the fields and the time we actually received it. And from time to time, the data could be either incomplete or inconsistent across the 4 countries we are effectively operating in. So as a technology company, and given that the project was all about bringing ICT tools and connectivity to the schools, it came naturally to us that we should move actually from this paper-based M&E approach to something that is more led by the technology and really leveraging the tools available to us and mobile-based data collection platform specifically, to be able to improve our own M&E of the INS program. So when we implemented this mobile-based M&E platform, which I'm going to detail just after, we noticed some great improvements in terms of the quality of data we received from the fields. And what do I mean really by quality? Well, there are really 4 criteria that we're using. The first one is that the data came in a timely manner. So whereas before, as I mentioned, there were often a lot of delays between the collection to the analysis of the data, we are now able, with the solution we implemented, to virtually access the data immediately. So it's almost live data coming from all the activities we have across the 4 countries. Secondly, the data is effectively more consistent, because as we deployed and designed this M&E solution, we really worked with all the teams in the field to make sure that the tools would be useful, would fit the local conditions and limitations. And through the process, we also very much aligned on all the terminology and definitions to ensure some consistency across the 4 countries and across all the teams when they are reporting data. Thirdly, the data is becoming more reliable, and that's really because we moved from a paper-based data collection process, which where there's room for human mistakes. So, if the team is effectively completing survey on paper and then passing on to the project manager, who is capturing all the information on Excel spreadsheets, there is room for human mistakes. And through the technology, we effectively reduce this space and enable us to have more reliable data. And through the technology as well, we have seen that the system is leading to more data ownership from the local team as well. So they can see the data, they can visualize it through the INEE dashboards that we have, and therefore it's driving more ownership and ensuring the integrity of the data. So it's all well and good to have and to collect a lot of data, but I think coming back really at the purpose of this data and why we're putting so much effort into having as much as efficient as possible an INEE platform is really because it's impacting the program, both at a strategic level, because through the data we collect, we're effectively able to demonstrate impacts, validate some of the strategic objectives that were defined with UNHCR, and also better engage with all the stakeholders or funders that are involved in the project to effectively drive more buy-in. But also, and really importantly, data has an impact on our operation and the way we operate and deliver the program. Because we have more data, we have a more agile approach, and we take some data-driven decision to be able to iterate all the time on solutions that we implement in the grounds. So data is really important at those two levels, so strategic and operational. So concretely, how does the solution work? Well, it's a three-step approach. So the first approach is relying on a mobile application that we have available through dedicated tablets that the local team is effectively using. So the INS coaches, which are here every day in the schools and effectively managing the instant classroom, helping the teachers to deliver the lesson, etc. So those focal points, key focal points that are local, are responsible for submitting the data to us. So they are using this mobile application, and in this application there are some predefined surveys that we all worked out together and that they can complete, and that would provide us information on any type of activities that is happening in the INS centers. Once the coaches submitted their surveys, it would be available for validation to the project manager. So the project manager is effectively sitting at the camp level and is overlooking all the INS schools in this given camp. So the project manager is then able to engage and discuss with the coaches to validate or ask for the data to be modified, etc. The third step, so once the information has been validated by the project manager, it would automatically be published and be pushed into what we call the live data dashboard. And this dashboard is available online to any stakeholders of the program, either the local team or management team, and to be able to view, visualize, and analyze the data that is being submitted. So just to give you a better idea there, and I hope the screenshots are clear for everyone, but this is some pictures of the dashboard and what it looks like, to give you an idea of the kind of information we are collecting. So for example, we have graphically available the number of monthly beneficiaries for all the centers. We also collect the gender information in terms of the beneficiaries, the level of school activities, so we're able to identify how many lessons happen in a given instant classroom on a per school grade basis, have information about what the classes were all about in terms of topics, the type of educational content that was used, etc. So all those information are extremely valuable for us to be able to plan the operation of the INS program. In addition to all those data collected, we also use this M&E dashboards to have a kind of ticketing platform. So the local team are effectively able, still using this mobile app, able to report any issues that they may have in their center. Could be technical issue, could be a request for support, etc. And we are using this platform to centralize any request and therefore better manage what needs to be done and what should be our priorities, etc. And a way to communicate updates to the team. And linking back to Ali's presentation, we also try to integrate within this platform a blog functionality, which really enable us to capture more of the qualitative feedback coming from the program. So all the teams are able to have a voice effectively on this blog and share any stories or any new initiatives that they piloted within the INS schools. And this tool really enables us to share best practice, connect all the teams together because we're working across 4 countries. So this link is actually important, and just a mechanism to inspire the teams to do more and to try more initiatives. Great. I'm coming back. So just to wrap up, I think there are a couple of lessons that I wanted to highlight for you today in terms of our lessons learned from this experience of rolling out the M&E platform and this M&E solution. I think firstly, it's really important to try to really adapt to the operational context and the limitations. So you need to have a solution that would work in the worst scenario possible. To give you an example, in a school, in theory, we have internet access, but we acknowledge that internet, we could have a breakdown of internet at some point. So the solution we design and the mobile app we're using is effectively working in offline context as well as online. So having solutions and plan for backup is always important. Secondly, I mentioned I think it's really important to involve the field team through the design process to make sure you build ownership, and once you start rolling out the solution, they will effectively be using it and see the value of it. Thirdly, ensure all the technical infrastructure is in place. So that's important so that you don't get any barriers for people to actually use your solution. And so in our case, for example, that included the distribution of dedicated M&E tablets for the team to be able to do the reporting without having any constraints or relying on their own phone, etc., or own devices. The data validation cycle that we have in place, so having the project manager reviewing the entry from the INS coaches is an important key success factor because they enable the team to be fully aware of what's happening within the camp. But also it enables some data validation and making sure the data going through the platform is actually verified. And finally, once all those data are collected, I think it's really important to involve the local teams in the analysis and actually provide some contextual information about the data to be able to inform strategic decisions about the program. And actually, because we have this M&E dashboards and users are able to go and check the results for their own schools themselves, we're starting to see the INS coaches to actually provide us themselves with the contextual information for us to have the key to analyze the data they submitted. And finally, I think you need to be agile and iterative. both in terms of your program delivery, but also the M&E platform. So the version that you see on the screenshot is actually the third version. So we started with simpler data reporting and data points, and over time we're actually increasing the scope of it to get more and more information from the team. And we are actually looking at the moment to integrate more of the qualitative and impact data through this platform. So that would include measuring ICT literacy skills improvements, looking at the school attendance systems, etc. So bit by bit, we, as people are getting used to this new system, we are building more and more capability onto our dashboard. Okay, I'm going to stop here because I think I'm running out of time, but looking forward to the Q&A discussion. Thank you.
Great. Thank you very much to both of our presenters. Oh, am I on? So we'll be starting. Can you hear me? Yeah. We'll be starting with the question and answer period now. I thought what we could do is take maybe 3 questions for each of our presenters, and then we'll open it up to questions to either presenter. We've got about a little over 15 minutes left for questions, so I think that's a good amount of time. So we've got a couple of questions for Alban that we'll start with. 2 questions on whether the dashboard and the blogs are internal or publicly accessible. And then another question for Alban on whether do you feel having a live dashboard that many staff across the project and stakeholders can view help to incentivize that timely data collection, and to talk more about that. And the last question that we'll take for Alban for now is when she says involve the local team to contextualize the data, what does she mean about contextualization? So I'll throw that over to you, Alban, for those 3 questions.
Sure, thank you, Lisa. So I'm going to first take the question about the accessibility of the M&E dashboards. So at the moment, because we actually started the process last January, and we are in the process of getting all the teams on board and effectively measure the impact of this dashboard, it's currently all internal. So the page is actually password protected. But the plan is probably in the next coming months to open it up to the general public to some extent. So not all the data will be available. And some of the blogs, for example, includes some data that we may not be able to share for privacy and child protection reasons. But the plan is in the coming months to have a public version of this dashboard. But if there is an interest in the audience to have a more detailed view of the dashboard and have a session to run through it, I'm really open to that. So I'm sure we'll share the contact details and feel free to contact me separately. In terms of so driving this dashboard being an incentive for the local team to effectively report data, I think the technology really provided a lot of different incentives to the local team to report data. The fact that everyone is able to see it online and all the project stakeholders are able to comment is probably definitely an incentive. But I think just the keenness of sharing what they are doing in their centers and showing to everyone that there is a lot of activities happening is an incentive itself. But what we found as well is that the coaches are actually quite pleased with the tool because they view it as something that is less time consuming as before. because before they really had to capture everything on paper and then reconcile all the data on a monthly basis, and it was actually really time consuming for them. So the fact that they can use this mobile app with pre-designed survey, and it literally takes 2 minutes at the end of each activity to complete, and they actually view it as a real benefit to them, in opposition to the paper-based processes, if that makes sense. And finally, so in terms of contextualization, what I mean is that it's really interesting because so we really implemented this solution last January, and so we're starting to have the trends over a 9-month period. And so we're starting to see the level of activities going up and down depending on the month, and actually having some context to actually explain why the level of activities is going down or up in a given month is really important. And only the local team is able to provide this information. It could be the activities is going down because there was actually exam period, so the classroom wasn't used as much because everyone was busy taking exams. It could be that internet went down for a couple of weeks, which did happen in Tanzania, and we immediately saw the impact in terms of teachers coming in to prepare their lesson. That was an immediate drop, almost, when the internet went down. So all of those information that actually can help you explain the data is really important, and only the local team can provide you with this information if you're not on site all the time, which is our case.
Thanks very much, Elvan. So we do have a couple more questions for her, but I want to make sure we get in time for everyone. So we'll turn now to some questions for Ali. We have 3 questions for Ali. The first one, how did you choose those who will take part in the auto photography evaluation? What were the selection criteria? The second is, how did you deal with privacy issues related to the photos? And the third, again, I think of security. Has there been an issue or concern on youth security in the camp as a result of having access to the smartphones? So I'll give the mic to you, Ali.
So in terms of how we chose who would take part in an auto photography evaluation, the structure of Dadaab, for those who aren't familiar, is that there are 5 camps, and there were projects occurring in each of the camps. And so within the youth who had already been participating in the project in terms of designing their own youth-led social change activities, those who were participating, we basically randomly selected by camp. So if we had 4 participants who were participating or who were leading social change activities and would be involved in the monitoring and evaluation from Cambios, 2 of them were randomly assigned to the auto photography group, and 2 were assigned to the more traditional monitoring and evaluation group. And that was just to minimize any bias that we could, but we also had to have that geographic location. And again, this being the most significant change project and really just testing out the auto photography, we're not using a very large sample. We had 20 participants in each group, or 18. So we're not drawing on, we're not trying to be representative of all youth or even all youth who are engaged in these projects, but rather the youth who had been involved from the very beginning in the projects and were volunteering to participate in the monitoring and evaluation. So that's a great question. In terms of the privacy issues, now this obviously comes up a lot with photography. And in monitoring and evaluation, whether you're working with staff who don't have backgrounds in monitoring and evaluation, there's a lot of training that happens. So in our case, working with beneficiaries, we conducted a training, and part of that training, especially for the participants in the auto photography group, was asking permission and talking about how you approach people and whether or not how they'll respond and what you do in those situations. And in the interviews after the data collection, some youth did talk about like these people were upset with me for taking this photograph. Obviously, those photographs weren't shared here. And in the sharing here, I tried to minimize so that there were, we didn't have any direct shots of people's faces. But dealing with privacy issues is difficult when we have the youth who are going out and taking the photographs, because I can get the information back on my end that they, ask permission and talk to the people about whether or not they could share their photographs. But I can't guarantee, that was actually what happened in the field. Given the training, we hope for the best that those conversations happened when the photography happened. But again, for me to share any of the photographs from there, it's really identifying photographs that aren't showing full face, that are, as trying to be, trying to minimize putting anybody in an uncomfortable position. And youth did talk about the challenges of some people not wanting to be photographed and making sure that they had permission and that everything was okay, either after the fact, deleting the photograph, or talking to them ahead of time. In terms of youth security in the camp, this actually came up a lot in the interviews, because we were really thinking about what the youth social change projects were contributing to peace building, social cohesion, reduction of the risk of radicalization at the time of data collection. And so this youth security in the camp there hasn't been, to my knowledge, and I know some of you on this call may have experience in Dadaab, and may want to contribute what your experience is, but there hasn't been, to my knowledge, anything directly related to smartphones and cameras, but keeping in mind that people would be able to, I just saw another message popped up related to this topic, so I'm just going to answer it right now. We did oral consent into getting the privacy issues, and that's mostly because of writing and literacy. So youth security in a camp related to having access to smartphones and cameras is not something that I've heard about specifically, but I would say that youth security in the camp is something that we discussed at length during the interviews, especially related to social change projects for peace building, for social cohesion, and what that really meant for the youth who are participating in them, the risks that they may be facing, and what further training that they wanted related to that topic. So thank you.
Thank you very much, Ali. We are still good on time, so I think we'll just go back and wrap up some additional questions for Alban. And there's two here that I see. One, what are the main challenges? What have been the main challenges to get the M&E process done? And I think the dashboard one we've already answered. Is the dashboard interactive? And then the third, what's an example of a data-driven decision that was taken as a result of having this real-time or readily accessible data?
Great, thank you for those two questions, really interesting ones. So in terms of the challenges, I think that there were different type of challenges. So one being around the technology and making sure that we find a platform and a solution that can be used in the local context and is robust enough to accommodate any changes in the local context. So that was something that it can be viewed as a challenge, and it can take time to make sure that you're making the right decision when selecting your technology partner. I think overall with M&E, we were really keen to collect as much information as possible about the impact of the program, etc. And I think the actually restricting yourself and defining what is the key information that you really need to start with acknowledging that over time you will be able to increase the level of data that you collect and add new data points for the team to collect in the ground was a key challenge for us. So really identify what is the key critical information that I need now, and then over time we can build on what's existing. And I think that's a process that any M&E project have. I mean, it's a challenge for M&E processes, but particularly when it comes to technology and you're introducing something new to the team, it's important to make sure that you build confidence before actually increasing the scope. And then I think really important that I mentioned earlier is really involving the team in the design process to ensure buy-in. So that can be logistically challenging when you're operating across 4 countries and you need to make sure all your KPIs are aligned to the local school system, etc. But this is a process that is really worth doing after for the long-term quality of the data you collect. Yes, so I hope that answered this question. And in terms of example of data-driven decision resulting from the dashboard that we have, that's a really good question. And I think probably one of the best examples that I could give is that we actually saw in Kakuma and near Guslu a drop in the level of activities in the INS centers. So there were a bit less lessons happening. And we started to engage with the local team to understand why this was happening. And really what it came down to was actually the lack of time for the teachers to be able to prepare their lessons ahead of delivering it to the students. So this preparation time was not something that we initially factored in the INS operation, and effectively, following this discussion we had with the team, we were able to modify the INS timetable because there is a timetable to use the classroom to accommodate the whole of Friday free for teachers to come in and only dedicate their time to preparing their lesson for the following week. And this decision, after a couple of weeks, we actually saw again an increase in the level of activities during the 4 other days of the week in the INS centers. So that's one decision, but then there are many more. Some of them are more technology oriented, for example. So a lot of teachers were reporting to us that it was actually really difficult to store and create their own content and store it to be able to deliver a lesson. And we recently delivered a new platform which enable the teachers to create their lesson and store it on a local server, so that they can keep it for next year, improve it, but also share it with other teachers and therefore enable more collaborative work in the school. But all of those challenges were actually identified by the beneficiaries of the program and shared with us through the platform by the INS team. And thanks to this data, we are always able to improve the program and how it operates in the field.
Thank you. Thank you very much to both of our presenters. That's all the time we have today. But thanks to Alban and to Ali for sharing their work with us. This is a really interesting topic and great question. So thanks also to all of the participants and those of you who had questions and comments for us. Just as a reminder, you can still see you can access the presentations and there will be contact information for both the presenters on the INEE site, as well as a recording of this webinar. So thanks very much, and we hope to see you at the next webinar in this series. Stay tuned.